My name's Kelsey Moran. I'm 27 now, but I'll never forget what happened when I was 17. I was standing in the office above our almond packing line, still holding my MIT acceptance letter, when my mom slapped me across the face and told me I was worthless. All because I didn't want to take over the family business. She yanked the letter out of my hands, crushed it in her fist, and leaned in with this venom in her voice. You think you're walking out of here to play with computers? You're not going anywhere. This farm is your life. I told her. I got a full ride. I can build something real. Something that doesn't rise and fall with the price of almonds. I don't want to spend my whole life arguing about irrigation. Before I even finished the sentence, her hand came out of nowhere. I didn't see it. I just felt the sting, heard the crack, and then silence. My cheek was on fire, my ears were ringing, and the whole room seemed to freeze for a second. You're ungrateful and useless, she said, her voice flat and ice cold. If you walk out that door, don't bother coming back. You're no daughter of mine. Behind her, my stepdad didn't say a word, just stood there watching. My brother was leaning in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes locked on the floor. I picked up my backpack, wiped my face with the back of my hand, and walked out into the heat without looking back. 10 years later, I'd step off my own private plane just past those same trees, and every one of them would stare at me like they'd seen a ghost. But before we get to how I went from being kicked out of that office to flying my own plane back to that same factory, go ahead and tap like, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss more real stories of family drama and payback. A few hours after I left, everything hit me like a weight I couldn't shake. It settled over me like dust I couldn't wipe off. But I kept walking because stopping meant admitting I had nowhere to go. The road ahead felt endless, and all I knew was that I couldn't stay anywhere near the farm. Too many people who knew me, too many questions I couldn't answer. So I just started moving toward town, carrying a half-filled backpack in this fading sense of purpose. That first night I had no plan. I sat outside a grocery store until the sky turned black, pretending I was waiting for someone. When the cold crept into my sleeves, I kept scrolling through my phone until I finally messaged the only person who might actually get it. Her family had always been solid, steady in the way mine never was, and I prayed they still saw me the same way. When they opened their door not long after, I almost couldn't breathe from the relief. They didn't ask for details. They didn't make me explain. They just gave me space. And in that moment, that was everything. Sleeping in their spare room was never meant to be permanent. I knew that. I needed to find a way to build a life that didn't fall apart every time someone slammed a door in my face. The next morning I started walking through town, looking for anywhere that would take someone with no experience, no references, nothing. The diner by the highway gave me a late-night dishwashing shift. A cleaning company a few blocks over added me to their night crew. The jobs weren't hard, but the hours bled together. Days turned into a blur of noise, grease, and exhaustion. I spent nights scrubbing counters till my hands throbbed, then hauled heavy trash bags across parking lots lit by flickering streetlights. That's how I learned to survive with nobody to fall back on. That MIT letter stayed tucked in my backpack, folded up like glass. Too painful to open, too important to throw away. I wasn't ready to admit that one moment, one decision by someone else, might have closed the door on my future. Every chance I had, I'd look up the scholarship requirements again, hoping, just maybe, something had changed. But it never had. Without the tax documents that only my mom could provide, the scholarship couldn't be released. I called, emailed, begged, searched for any loophole I could find. But every path led straight back to the same dead end. There was no way to fight a system that demanded paperwork I no longer had access to. Once that reality sank in, the disappointment hit harder than I expected. It wasn't just about missing out on a dream. I felt like I'd run straight into a wall I couldn't climb, and it wasn't even my fault. But I wasn't about to quit. I started looking for something, anything I could still reach. That's when I found a community college in Fresno that offered programs without all the red tape. It wasn't the path I'd imagined for myself, but it was a path. And at that moment, that was enough to keep me from collapsing into frustration. I used almost all of my savings to pay the first month's rent on a tiny studio at the edge of town. The place smelled faintly like wet wood, and the heater clanked every time it kicked on. But it was mine. For the first time, I had a space of my own. The nights were quiet, too quiet sometimes. I'd lie awake in bed, listening to cars hum past on the road outside, wondering how long it would take before I stopped feeling like I was always on the verge of breaking. Classes started not long after I got settled. The campus wasn't huge, but it gave me a structure I desperately needed. Having a routine, a seat in a classroom, assignments to complete, it gave me a sense of purpose again. Between my shifts at the diner and cleaning jobs, I hauled my laptop with me everywhere I went, squeezing in coding exercises whenever I had a few free minutes. The routines didn't erase all the uncertainty in my life, but they helped me survive it. Even on the days that felt unbearably heavy, I kept telling myself that progress, no matter how slow, was better than staying stuck. I didn't know what my future would look like. All I had was a cramped room, a stack of textbooks, and this quiet determination that I wasn't finished. And for the moment, that was enough to keep me going. Over the next few weeks, those routines started shaping me into someone I hadn't realized I was becoming. The exhaustion never fully went away, but there was something grounding about knowing exactly how each hour of my day would play out. Mornings were for classes, afternoons for study, evenings for the diner, and nights for cleaning. It wasn't exciting, but it held my world together. The library on campus quickly became my favorite place to breathe. It was quiet, calm, and far removed from the noise of clattering dishes or echoing hallways. I'd spread my textbooks across a table, determined to take in as much as I could. Even when I could barely keep my eyes open, I made myself stay. The work was tough, but that didn't scare me anymore. What scared me was the thought of slipping backward. One afternoon, I was buried in an assignment when I noticed a woman at the next table, tapping her pen in a steady rhythm. She looked laser-focused, completely locked in, and something about the confidence in her face stuck with me. It wasn't that I admired her. It was more like she reminded me that I wasn't alone. Someone else here was chasing something just as seriously. And when she closed her laptop and walked out, the energy she left behind stayed with me. I wanted to live up to that. Little by little, the campus started to feel like a place I belonged. A professor would leave extra notes on the board after class. A fellow student passed me a study guide without expecting anything in return. Even just being seen, acknowledged, was new for me. It made me realize I wasn't invisible here. It was strange, honestly, figuring out how to exist in a place where no one expected me to sacrifice my goals for some family ideal. Surviving for myself instead of for someone else? That was unfamiliar ground. But outside of school, the grind never let up. I worked long shifts. My hands were constantly covered in tiny cuts from scrubbing metal counters, and my back ached from lifting box after box. Every job reminded me how unstable life could be. But it also taught me something I never learned on the farm: how to be resilient. Nobody cared how I stacked the plates. Nobody hovered, judging every move like they were weighing whether I was fit to inherit their legacy. Out here, I didn't have to carry anyone else's burden. I was just trying to build something that was mine. There was something freeing about being judged only by the work I put in, not by my last name or where I came from. Just effort, pure and simple. But even with the progress I was making, there were still nights when doubt crept in. Sometimes I'd sit alone in that quiet studio, the heater humming in the background, and wonder if I'd been wrong about myself all along. Maybe the girl who thought she belonged at MIT had misread the signs. Maybe I'd been reaching too far. Those thoughts usually hit when everything felt still and heavy. But even then, even when it felt like I was chasing something miles out of reach, I'd flip open my laptop and make myself keep learning. I didn't have the luxury of giving up. One of those late nights, I stumbled across a tech and engineering club at school. They had a page full of competitions, group projects, meetups. Everything I wanted to be part of but couldn't, not with the hours I worked. It hit hard, seeing how much I had to give up just to stay afloat. But instead of letting that feeling sink in, I made a folder on my desktop and started filling it with ideas, things I could work on solo. If I couldn't join their team, I'd build my own. A few weeks later, I finally saved enough to replace the battery in my old laptop. It wasn't some huge upgrade, but to me it felt like I just repaired a piece of myself. Afterward, I sat in the library for hours going through coding tutorials and challenge problems, just trying to make something that reminded me I still had it in me. Each time I figured something out, it felt like I was reclaiming a little bit of the ground I'd lost the day I walked off that farm. But the more I worked, the more I realized I was missing something: guidance. The college was giving me the basics, but I needed someone with real-world experience. Someone who could open doors I didn't even know existed. That moment came in the form of a note from one of my professors. He left detailed feedback on a project I turned in, pointing out how I had approached the problem differently and effectively. It wasn't just about the grade. That comment meant he saw me. He saw what I was doing alone at night when no one else was looking. That kind of recognition? It lit a fire. Weeks turned into months. The routines I'd built, ones I thought were temporary, started to feel like the framework of a real life. The pain from everything that happened with my family didn't vanish, but it didn't control me either. Every small win added a little more distance between me and the version of myself who thought her future depended on her mother's permission. I didn't realize it at the time, but every dish I scrubbed, every assignment I turned in, every shift I pushed through, it was all laying the foundation for something bigger than I could see. By the time a new semester rolled around, my life had a rhythm. Sharp. Focused. I'd stopped hoping things would get easier. Instead, I learned to work inside the chaos. Early mornings became habit, and the bone-deep fatigue I once fought off just became part of the process. It wasn't pleasant, but it reminded me why I was doing this. One afternoon, heading toward the science wing, I spotted a bulletin board packed with flyers. Most people just walked by, but something made me stop. I scanned every single sheet. Competitions, innovation programs, academic challenges. They weren't just about prizes. These were entry points into the kind of world I'd been clawing my way toward. The deadlines were brutal, expectations sky high. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark, something that cut through all the routines and exhaustion. I didn't know if I had what it took, but something inside me whispered that I had to try. Over the next few days, I rearranged my entire life around that challenge. I dropped a cleaning shift, streamlined my study time, trained myself to work faster without letting the quality slip. The competition required a full concept, a working prototype, and a written breakdown explaining how it could solve a real-world problem. It was a huge ask for someone holding down 2 jobs. But I was all in. Ambition was the one thing no one could strip from me. No matter what I'd lost, that stayed mine. Most nights I was hunched over my desk in the little studio, surrounded by notebooks filled with scribbles, half-finished diagrams, and crossed-out ideas. The heater's steady hum was the background track to my routine as I sketched, erased, rewrote, and started again. Progress came in inches, but with every tweak and adjustment, the project started taking shape. And the deeper I got, the more I realized I wasn't doing this to prove anything to the people who shut the door on me. I was proving it to myself, proving that walking away from the farm didn't mean I'd left my potential behind. Still, working alone had its limits. I knew I needed input from someone who didn't think like I did, someone who could see angles I kept missing. My thoughts kept drifting back to that woman I'd noticed in the library, the one who tapped her pen while studying, who tackled assignments with sharp focus and calm control. Surprised me how often she came to mind. There was something about her precision, the quiet intensity, that stuck with me. I started paying more attention to her work, not out of jealousy but because she made me want to level up. Her drive pushed me to match her pace. Eventually, just watching from a distance wasn't enough. I needed guidance I couldn't pull from YouTube tutorials or midnight trial and error. When one of my professors gave me detailed feedback on a technical submission, I read his notes over and over until I understood exactly what I'd missed. He pointed out flaws I hadn't even realized were there. And the clarity that brought changed everything. Each time I fixed something, each step forward gave me a feeling I hadn't had in a long time. Momentum. Real momentum. The kind I felt the day I got my MIT acceptance letter. As I pushed deeper into the project, I noticed something else. The way I thought about life had changed. When I left the farm, survival was just about getting through the next day. Now every hour had weight and meaning. Every action had a goal behind it. When I felt the exhaustion creeping in, I reminded myself, deadlines don't care where I came from. They only care about what I deliver. Even with tight savings, I managed to scrape together enough to buy some basic materials for a prototype. The parts were cheap and I had to get creative with what I could afford. But slowly, piece by piece, I built something. It wasn't sleek. It wasn't perfect. But it was mine. Each night, I reinforced the structure and studied how the components worked together. Bit by bit, the idea stopped being just an idea, it became real. Of course, fear still showed up. The thought of putting myself out there and failing in front of everyone made my stomach turn. But that fear, it sounded a lot like the voice I'd grown up hearing, the one that told me I wasn't good enough. I'd lived with that voice before. I wasn't going to let it stop me now, so I worked through it, because failing didn't scare me nearly as much as staying stuck. By the time the submission window opened, my project still had its rough edges, but it held everything I had. I uploaded the files, attached the documentation, and hit submit with hands that were shaking, partly from nerves, partly from sheer exhaustion. I didn't know if I'd make it past the first round, but honestly, just showing up, just trying already felt like a win. I had no idea that this one quiet decision, made alone in a small flickering studio, would change the direction of my life. The email came on a morning like any other. I wasn't expecting much, just another long day of work and classes. I opened my laptop with the usual heaviness in my shoulders, planning to review some half-forgotten notes. But the subject line stopped me cold. I'd been selected. My submission had made it to the next round. For a second I just sat there, frozen. The room felt quieter than usual, like everything around me paused for that one moment. I hadn't let myself believe I'd get this far. I entered that competition to prove I could try, not because I thought I'd make it. But seeing my name on that list, it hit something deeper than relief. It felt like the kind of validation I'd been chasing long before I even knew I was chasing it. The next round of the competition meant in-person demos and detailed evaluations. I knew I wasn't ready, at least not in the way some of the others would be. Most of them had access to real equipment, clean prototypes, mentorship, polish. Me? I had a clunky model built from clearance bin parts and more late-night trial and error than I could count. But quitting? That never even crossed my mind. I'd already come too far to walk away now. Preparing for the demo took over every spare second I had. I juggled my schedule again, cutting diner shifts wherever I could without risking my rent. The manager wasn't happy, but the cleaning company let me swap around shifts more flexibly, which helped me keep things together. Balancing it all became this delicate dance. Every step had to be exact. One misstep and the whole thing could come crashing down. But as I made each small improvement to the prototype, I felt the gap widening between who I was and who I used to be. I didn't see the scared kid anymore, the one who got thrown out of her house for wanting a different life. I saw someone who chose not to let fear or rejection define her. The project had become more than just a contest entry. It was proof that my identity wasn't tethered to anyone else's expectations. As the demo date approached, the whole campus buzzed with anticipation. People whispered about who the top contenders were. Students with polished resumes, sleek designs, and professors rooting for them. I watched them from the sidelines in packed hallways and crowded study rooms. I saw their confidence, their resources, their support systems. Some had teams. Some had faculty mentors. I had none of that. But the space around me, the emptiness I used to see as a disadvantage, didn't feel like weakness anymore. It felt like a test I was finally ready for. On the day of the demonstration, I showed up early and set up my little table. The hall was alive with energy, bright lights, sleek displays, and judges checking their clipboards. My project sat beside me. Not perfect, but fully mine. The nerves settled in my chest, tight and sharp, but underneath them was something stronger: resolve. I wasn't there to prove anything to the people who doubted me. I was there for the version of myself who once wondered if she even deserved to try. When it was my turn, the room seemed to hold its breath. I positioned the prototype exactly how I'd practiced, blocking everything else out as I walked through the presentation. Every word, every step came from long nights alone, figuring it out piece by piece. I pulled from every adjustment I'd made, every problem I'd solved in silence. It wasn't flawless. The model flickered once, and I had to double-check my hand placement more than I liked. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel out of place. I wasn't just there, I belonged there. I stood my ground, steady in the knowledge that no one handed me this moment. I earned it one stubborn step at a time. After it ended, I packed up slowly, feeling this strange kind of calm. I had no idea how the judges would respond, no clue if I'd make it to the next round. But as I stepped out into the hallway and felt the cool air brush against my skin, I knew something had shifted for good. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was finally building a future I could call mine. What I didn't realize then was that this competition, This one event on an otherwise ordinary campus was about to open a door I never even dreamed existed. The days after the competition felt like they were suspended in midair, stretched thin and waiting for something to give. I kept going, kept working, studying, showing up because if I stopped, the anxiety would catch up. And I couldn't afford to lose momentum now. My shifts stayed the same. My assignments piled up like always. The routines I'd carved into my life held steady. But underneath it all, there was this quiet current, an almost invisible awareness that something might be shifting, somewhere just out of sight. That shift came quietly in the form of an email. I was sitting in the library, trying to catch up on the reading I'd neglected while preparing for the competition, when the notification popped up. I froze for a second, staring at it. Part of me didn't want to open it. I was bracing for rejection dressed up as polite encouragement. But it wasn't rejection. It was an invitation. Turns out, my project had caught the eye of a faculty member. They'd recommended me for an innovation program backed by an engineering firm in Sacramento. It wasn't a job offer or a promise, but it came with mentorship, access to resources, and most importantly, the chance to push my idea beyond the limits of my cramped studio and tight budget. It felt unreal, like I'd stumbled into someone else's story, one I didn't feel ready to claim yet. But I said yes. And just like that, I had to rebuild my life again, this time around a new goal. I trimmed every non-essential expense, reshuffled my schedule, carved out slivers of time for the commute between campus and the firm's office. The drive was long, the days were longer, but each mile and every hour I put in made my grip on the future just a little stronger. The first time I stepped into the firm's workspace, I felt a wave of nerves crash over me. The place buzzed with quiet intensity. Whiteboards filled with sketches, glowing monitors streaming lines of code, people moving like they knew exactly where they were going and why. I didn't know if I belonged there, but I knew I wanted to. They paired me with a mentor who tore into my concept with sharp, surgical precision. His feedback came through annotated files, technical diagrams, and line-by-line suggestions that saw things I never could have spotted on my own. I didn't feel overwhelmed, I felt hungry. I studied every note, sometimes reading the same paragraph over and over until it clicked. For the first time, I had guidance that pushed me past what I thought I was capable of. And as I worked, my project evolved. What had once been a shaky prototype, held together by hope and discount parts, started turning into a real design. One with structure, potential, and vision. Every upgrade peeled back another layer of doubt. Every breakthrough made me feel a little less like the girl who'd been told she was useless the day she chose a different future. Little by little, I started stepping out of the shadow of who I'd been. No longer just surviving. No longer just proving something. I was finally building something that came from me. Some nights, the exhaustion pressed in so hard it felt like I couldn't take a full breath. But the fatigue wasn't empty anymore. It came with purpose. It reminded me how far I'd climbed from where I started. The further I went, the more I realized that the struggles I used to curse were the very things that shaped me. They built a kind of resilience I hadn't known I'd been carrying. They sharpened how I thought, how I worked, how I stood under pressure. As months passed, my role in the program expanded. I was invited to networking events, project evaluations, workshops packed with people who were actually living the kind of careers I once thought were out of reach. Walking into those rooms felt like crossing some invisible border. I observed everything, how people spoke about their work, how they introduced themselves, how they carried that quiet confidence that didn't need to prove anything. And with each new interaction, I gathered tools. Not just for my project, for me. This program wasn't just about refining an idea. It was refining me. The turning point came late one night at the firm. Most of the lights were off, and the office had emptied out hours ago. I stayed behind, tweaking a section of the design, focused in a way that felt different from before. That night, something clicked. I didn't feel like an outsider anymore. I wasn't standing on borrowed ground, pretending to belong. I did belong. I was contributing, growing, learning to hold space in rooms I once thought were off-limits. Looking back, it was in those quiet after-hours moments, just me, the low hum of machines, and the soft glow of my laptop, that I realized something I hadn't understood until then. I wasn't just running from my past anymore. I was building a future powerful enough to eclipse it. What I didn't know was how fast that future would start moving, and how the next door opening would completely shift the course of my life. It happened with a kind of seriousness that made everything leading up to it feel like training for this exact moment. My work at the innovation program had grown. What started as a project had turned into something bigger than I imagined. And then, one afternoon, I got the email that changed everything. A startup in San Francisco had seen one of the projects I'd contributed to, and they wanted to bring me on board. It wasn't just a job. It was a position that offered real responsibility and a chance to level up far beyond anything the program could provide. It almost didn't feel real. But somewhere deep down, I knew I'd been walking toward this for a long time. Saying yes meant pulling up my roots again. I packed my things quietly, folding away reminders of late nights and hard beginnings, feeling a calm I didn't expect. Moving to San Francisco came with its own set of hurdles. New city, new standards, new pressure to prove I wasn't a fluke. But I was used to that. The city moved fast and I had to move with it. But every step forward made me feel more solid in who I was becoming. The role started entry-level, but it didn't stay that way for long. I poured myself into the work. Late nights, tough problems, endless refinement. I learned from everyone around me. I watched how they solved problems, how they thought, how they adapted. And I soaked up every bit of it. With each lesson, I gained something I didn't even know I lacked. Confidence that came from not just keeping up, but helping to lead. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was shaping the path in front of me. Months turned into years. The company grew and I grew with it. I stepped into leadership roles. My ideas were heard and respected. The determination I once carried alone in silence now echoed through the work I was doing and the team I was helping to build. Then came a moment I never expected. An investment group approached me with a proposal. Start my own company. Build something from the ground up, something bold, demanding, innovative. Something mine-dash. And I said yes. Starting a company took a level of focus I didn't know I still had in me. The long hours came back. So did the uncertainty. But this time I wasn't clawing my way out of desperation. I was building with purpose. The company took off. Investors came on board. Partnerships formed. The success that once felt light years away slowly became my day-to-day reality. Eventually, I bought a small plane for business travel. Just the idea of it made me pause. Not because of the cost, but because of what it meant: mobility, independence, and this quiet confirmation that I'd stepped fully into the life I once thought I'd never be allowed to live. And then, without warning, the past knocked on my door again. One morning, I got an email from a financial consultant requesting a meeting about a struggling agricultural operation in the Central Valley. The name of the farm froze me. It was the farm. The same one I walked away from. The same place I was told I was ungrateful for leaving. Their debt had ballooned past the point of recovery. Production was down. The entire operation was on the edge of collapse. I sat with that information longer than I expected, just letting it settle, feeling the weight of everything that land had meant to me once. But what rose to the surface wasn't anger. It was clarity. I didn't owe them anything. Not the people who threw me out. Not the ones who told me I was worthless for wanting a different future. But I also knew that if the farm went under, it wouldn't just affect them. There were workers' families who depended on that place to survive. Saving it didn't mean saving them dash. And that distinction mattered. So I made the call. When I flew back, my plane landed on a small strip just beyond the edge of the property. I stepped out onto the same ground I used to walk barefoot as a teenager. But I didn't feel nostalgia. I didn't feel fear. Just distance. My mother and stepfather walked toward me. Their faces twisted into something between disbelief and desperation. Time had worn them down. Their expressions were harder. Their bodies tense with years of trying to hold on. But I didn't feel moved. Not toward forgiveness. Not toward revenge. Just steady. The negotiations were simple. Straightforward. I reviewed the financials, examined the liabilities, and bought the land and the facilities through a holding company registered in my name. The employees stayed. The operation continued. But my mother and stepfather? They lost ownership. Completely. Their decisions had consequences. And this time they arrived without fireworks. No shouting, no scenes. Just signatures and silence. Later, walking the rows of the field, I let it sink in. Not just what had happened, but what it meant. I didn't need closure from them. I didn't need them to say I was right. I didn't need an apology. My life, the one I built from scratch, was enough. spoke for itself. What mattered most was the truth I'd come to understand through every setback, every shift, every quiet victory. Breaking away from the roles others tried to force on me was the beginning of everything. Yes, pain shaped me, but it was resilience that carried me. And standing there on that old farm with nothing left to prove, I saw it clearly. Some doors don't just close, they slam shut behind you. But the life you build on the other side, it can be stronger than anything you ever left behind.